We now live in a day and age where we have artificial intelligence that can fake video and audio. We have video game fans who literally just rent at full price. They rent video games from the producers of the video game. And then if that video game ever shuts down, it's gone for good. We are tabletop gamers, and we have the advantage that we're the last ground of reality in this world where everything is fake and artificial. And it doesn't matter about the production value or even the themes behind our tabletop games. What it comes down to, unless you're completely a D20 critical role fanatic, you have the advantage where you go out into the grass, you go out into the real world, and you find actual people to play your games with. Now, I want to talk about something that I just think about in general, and that's the reality of tabletop gaming. There's a lot of factors that could potentially influence what goes on as far as your choices of purchasing a game, which games you play with who, or if a game sees more shelf life than if it actually is a living game that you actually play all the time. Yet, when it comes to understanding how the game world goes, we can still be influenced falsely by sources of information that may not be accurate. Nowadays, there's three things I've seen. The companies are now really out to make money. Yes, corporations and companies have always tried to make money off their product, but now, like, sales are the bottom line. And it's kind of disgusting, but it's also there, and it was going to show up at one point or another, unless there was some kind of really good regulation going on. Another thing that's happening is we do have people who go out and they try to spread information about the game, usually to promote it, sometimes to knock it down. But there are people who try to influence the overall gist of who's playing what game towards playing theirs. It's like advertising, really, but it happens nowadays. Plus, we have plenty of sites out there that produce information, but they can often be, I won't say falsified, but it can be skewed or, changed or modified or pushed in one direction or another by things like internet brigading, advertising campaigns, trolls. So, honestly speaking, I want to show you guys something that I do sometime. If you can find an accurate place for the numbers, and a lot of them nowadays are paid for, there used to be a game magazine that would tell you yearly sales. I forgot what it was even called. It was not Game Trade Magazine. It was the other one that was sent to the distributors, and I forgot what it's called. But they used to actually have yearly sales figures for like the top 100 games. That was great. They had that. But now that I think about it, I have no clue where to actually get accurate information like that for the yearly move and push of games. There are some things you can do when it comes to looking out there. You can try to find places where they have aggregate information and use that aggregate information. It'll tell you the difference between, these are the games that people really worry about and play versus these are the games that no one cares about. So I'm going to look into how to do your own research in games. One site that I barely use, but it has decent information on it, is a site known as BoardGameGeek. And its sister site, which you can drop down to, Role-Playing Game Geek. Together, they make a nice source for just general stats. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to just ignore their overall ranking system. That's a system that can be very easily biased, but there are some stats on here that they have that you can just easily use. The first of these statistics, it's very easy to use, is user ranking. Again, very easy to bias, but at least it gives you a general gist over all people who have placed comments what their ranking is. Now, the funny thing is, this statistic only is leveraged against comments made. They have a ratings notation there that shows how many ratings have been dropped, but those aren't specifically tied to the other two, which I find a bit more important. How many people own the game? In my mind, that's actually the most important score. Who owns the game? In case that wasn't enough for you, you can compare that and the like score, the favorite score, the fan score, whatever you want to call it, against how many people have commented versus how many people have owned. The numbers don't necessarily add up. So you can tell that one of those numbers is not easily extrapolated of the other. They pretty much exist in their own different parts. There is a separate statistic I'm not going to show called number played. I can guarantee you, your average gamer doesn't finish playing a game and then immediately run over to BoardGameGeek and say, hey, look, I played a game today. I mean, it's nice that it's there, but I can guarantee you most gamers don't do that. There's a huge Venn diagram in general of people who report stats versus all the people the stats are relevant for. So with that, all in all, has to be taken into account. None of this is going to be super accurate. It's just going to be like just a general idea of what's going on. Numbers can be skewed. In fact, today I'm going to kind of assemble a few numbers for you. I'll show you a few ways they can be skewed. Now, looking into the actual stats itself, we have the big three here, and we can tell how different the site's management of those statistics matters to each of these. Magic the Gathering is all gathered under one site, one subsection that we can read through. Warhammer 40K is by edition, so it gets kind of sloppy. It's like, do you want to compare each and every edition against each and every edition? How many people reported for multiple different editions? What's available? I have here the 3rd edition, which was the first of this new generation of 40K. I say that because I started in 2nd. Warhammer 6th edition, which I played quite a bit of. And Warhammer 10th, which is the most recent edition. Then we have Dungeons & Dragons, which is almost impossible to narrow down. They have everything sorted under both board games and role-playing games on either side of the site. So I just have here Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the 2nd edition, and I have here 5th edition. Really, trying to get accurate statistics out of Dungeons & Dragons is going to be a pain in the butt. There's so many possible variables. There's edition wars, but there might be people who have every last edition, or who hate some editions and love some editions, and who love all editions. So the stats are going to get all kinds of wobbly really quickly. It'd be really nice if there was just one over category for Dungeons and Dragons that people could vote for specifically as, yes, I support this, I like this, I play this, and then also be able to divorce that to a subcategory. I do not own any kind of subscription to the site. I do not know what kind of statistical modifiers are actually performed behind the scenes. But just looking at it, we can start looking through and see what we have for various different games. Looking through the games, we have a pretty good contender with War Machine Prime. I take the 2nd edition because, weirdly enough, the 1st edition wasn't very well reported on. But here it looks like a pretty decently hefty game. More than 1,000 people own the game, and it has a decent number of actual fans on the site. With an overall rating of 7.8, it sounds relatively nice. Then we have Star Wars X-Wing. And do I see this correctly? 41,000 people own it. That's as many people as there are centuries in 40K. And it has 3,400 fans on the site. The people who play X-Wing really like to report this on BoardGameGeek. So this is an active community that actively uses BoardGameGeek. It's very possible there are other games out there that are this big that just don't report as strongly on this site. And we have Necromunda. It's also sitting pretty at 7.3. Has 2,200 people who own it and 188 fans. Not bad for a substrata Games Workshop game. Its recent remake has probably given it a little boost, but Necromunda was one of the most popular Games Workshop games from what I recall. I'm not going to let Hex and Chit crowd go unavoided here. The God Emperor of Hex and Chit games, Advanced Squad Leader, scores an impressive 8, has 6,400 people that own it, and almost 1,000 fans on this site. The people who are fans of this game, they come here. And that's the funny thing. These are probably old guys. However, we do have plenty of hits, so I'm going to say this is a pretty good return for something that's just a Hex and Chit game. This is kind of a funny one to look into. Vampire the Masquerade literally was competition for Dungeons and Dragons all throughout the 90s. It is one of the most significant role-playing games ever made. It actually redefined how we role-play quite a bit. However, look at the stats here. Pathetic, isn't it? Users owned a bit more than 500. Fans, a bit more than 100. Its actual ranking in actual, power, it gets a 7.22. So people like it well enough. This is obviously a game that existed before RPG Geek became a serious thing, so people just haven't been reporting it. I can guarantee you, if you go places and look into like old bookstores or places that sell used games or used books, you will find copies of Vampire the Masquerade easier than not. Then we have Pathfinder, the contender to replacing Dungeons & Dragons when Dungeons & Dragons made 4th edition.
It has some respect here. It has 348 fans. It's got a rating of just 7.36, and less than 1,000 people report owning this. This may also be a thing where people who like Pathfinder may not report things on BoardGameGeek, because Pathfinder is kind of like the dark underground of Dungeons & Dragons. However, I'm still going to take this as it is. GURPS. Are you familiar with GURPS? It's supposed to be the best role-playing game ever, according to those who are fans of GURPS. And it does have its advantages. It has 128 fans here, so most of them probably aren't using the internet if it's that widely spread. Has a rating of 7.21, so most of these ratings do average out into the 7s. So I'm not going to further report them unless they really stick out away from the 7 bracket. Also make note of the total plays there. That total plays of 592 is actually pretty interesting. And we might as well cover this gem, BattleTech, the highest ranking game that I've seen so far amongst major games at 8.3, with an impressive 1,700 people who own it and a mere 95 fans. Okay, what's really funny is if you compare this against the older statistics for BattleTech, has 354 fans, but 5,300 people report owning it. Time will tell, I guess. And so original BattleTech combined with BattleTech, if you somehow amalgamated those statistics, you would probably show that this community is very much so thriving. I'm also going to pop over to Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk 2020 is the oldest edition that sees common use, and I got news for you. It was reprinted recently and re-released in stores. But funny enough, I think this is a good way to actually take the statistics off the site. I've looked at Cyberpunk Red statistics and they don't look as good. But Cyberpunk 2020 has pretty decent statistics. 360 people report owning it with almost 100 fans. It sounds like most people who would do Cyberpunk anyway would rather report it on some site other than BoardGameGeek. However, it's also not as popular as some other role-playing games, so I'll take this as it is. And then for a few of my own favorites, Legend of the Five Rings. That's going to be a difficult one to put together because it is both a card game and a role-playing game. And the card game has a conglomerate section, whereas the role-playing section goes by each individual edition. So again, it's going to be a bit of a pain in the butt to assemble. However, looking at it, it looks pretty honest. The card game has a pretty strong ownership of, 2,300-ish people that own it and 154 fans. However, you compare it to the first edition of the role-playing game, and the fourth edition of the role-playing game, the people who do the role-playing don't report anywhere as strongly. They'll report that they like it as much, but they don't report as often or as consistently as the card game players goes. And that's not just for old school Legend of the Five Rings. The new school of Legend of the Five Rings, when the card gamers decided to report, they reported in force. 6,700 of them showed up, and there's 303 fans. The role-playing game, by comparison, they haven't been reporting it on this site, which is kind of funny because you would think they would. Another favorite of mine is good old Flames of War. Although Flames of War is the kind of game that people play away from stores and play away from the wider internet community, still 1,600 people represent it with 140 fans. I remember this old rivalry between Air Superiority, the Hex and Shit game, and Air War, the previous Hex and Shit game, and it looks like Air Superiority is winning here too. More people confess owning it, has more fans. Generally speaking, it just all around is doing better than its predecessor. Star Wars, the West End game. They have similar stats between first and second edition, so it does have the same kind of stats I would expect to see of a game that came out before computers really affected our lives as much as they do. Here's one that shocked me. Starfleet Battles. Although it rates a little low, just beneath 7, 1,900 people confess to own it, almost as many as some of the higher ranked games. 123 fans. So the people who like Starfleet Battles have shown up and they have made their presence known. By comparison, Noble Armada has gotten the bottom end of the rating shift with a minimal amount of owners and a single fan. I like Noble Armada, but apparently the internet does not. Looking into other role-playing games, one that stands out uniquely is Viking Death Squad. It has the highest rating I've seen anywhere at 9, with 1 rating. And no fans. 27 people say they own it, so that's nice, but whoever was giving it a 9 rating forgot to like and subscribe. Generally speaking, Viking Death Squad seems like it would be a really cool niche game with, a small group of people who played it, but no fans? Let's compare it against actual bad role-playing games to make Viking Death Squad feel good. After all, Viking Death Squad does deserve some respect, as opposed to Fatal. Fatal gets a rating of 1.45, the lowest rating on RPG Geek. There are 2 fans. 9 people confess to owning it. Fatal also is well known as being the worst role-playing game ever made. Sadly, we can compare that with Hong Kong Action Theater, 1st edition. And trust me, 2nd edition wasn't doing too much better. It's got low ratings at 5.58, but at least it's got 3 fans and 12 people confess to owning it. Poor Hong Kong Action Theater, it also deserves better. And a game I thought would do relatively poorly, but the people who love this game represented. Mustangs and Messerschmitts is probably one of the hardest games to find to play. However, 61 people say they own it, and it has 7 fans. It also gets decent ratings too. What I see of this, everybody who has access to the computer, who knows about BoardGameGeek, has put in their vote for Mustangs and Messerschmitts. Has to be, because I know like 5 different groups that play this game, having searched across the United States for them. So, one other game I'm going to cover just because it's worth covering. Before the internet really slammed into our lives, we had Exalted, which got some really early coverage on the internet too. And it's not very well reported here. I know for a fact that a major game company, White Wolf Games, put this out as a product, and they've been trying to make multiple different editions over time. So Exalted deserves some respect, but it just doesn't get any on RPG Geek. Well, once you have these numbers and you have a general idea of what you want to look for, you can start doing the actual math work. So here's the gist of what I've going through. I'm going to just guess that the fans are part of the people who own it. So I have this little mathematic where I remove the fans, and then I take percentage of the owners and then multiply it out by the rating that was given. And then I give the fans like a flat rating of 9 because they're fans, right? And then I combine that again to make a power rating that shows what would happen if most people with the average and then the fans with like maximum ratings got to get together and put their full weight towards how much they enjoyed their game and how much they wanted to report their game on the site. Then I divided it by 100 just to shrink the numbers so they're more legible. You could almost even say that with this little technique that games that went underneath the score of 100 probably aren't doing too well, whereas those who are higher than, let's say 500 are doing amazing. Of course, you can see that doesn't work too well here, as I have amalgams of D&D and 40K that aren't even touching those numbers when you look at their power scores. And that's just what I meant by you can skew the numbers. Like, I didn't take into account all editions of 40K. Therefore, the numbers are skewed. Plus, I have no way of knowing how many people double dipped on their favorite edition, right? Same thing with D&D. D&D looks pretty bad right now. I took the 2 editions that are the most opposed to each other, and so I guess my statistics there are a little bit more accurate, but I have no guarantee of that. Just to look it over, here we have the big 3 measured up against a few games that, are comparable in quality and power, especially X-Wing. My God, X-Wing was unexpectedly strong. And then here's me dinging around with L5R for a bit. And here's me putting together a few of my favorites. And then I can go back and say, hey, look, here's the power scores measured against each other. Mind you, if you're going to do a power score reading like this, you'll want to make a second sheet and copy over the values only. Otherwise, they'll get mixed up because the math goes wrong because of how the spreadsheet works. But anyway, here they're arranged by power. And then if we change it over so it's arranged by ownership, it's not too much different. But you do see the numbers switch around a little bit. And here I have showing the very bottom ends by math. There are 5 games that routinely show up with bad numbers, no matter how I put it. All in all, I kind of liked just dinking around with the numbers and seeing what I could do. I didn't really look to have any kind of actual truth come out of this, other than you can play with the numbers yourself. You can make your own decisions on these things. So, thanks very much for checking into this video, and hopefully you have a terrific rest of your week.